Hey guys, tonight we're leaving behind the shiny fairy tales. Forget the picture perfect castles with spotless towers, elegant ballrooms, and kings who somehow always look like they just stepped out of a shampoo commercial. Instead, we're wandering into the real medieval castle, a place built from cold stone, a place where almost everything was damp, a place that smelled, well, considerably worse than modern tourism brochures would have you believe. So dim the lights, get comfortable, maybe grab a blanket, and let your mind slowly drift back nearly 1,000 years to an age when luxury meant having your own chamber pot. Central heating was a large fireplace that mostly heated the ceiling, and privacy was a concept nobody had invented yet. Tonight, we're exploring the dark truth about medieval castles. Not the dramatic movie version, the everyday version, the sleepy version, the version where people spent far more time worrying about mold than dragons. So close your eyes, take a slow breath, and let's quietly walk through the castle gates. The first thing you would notice isn't the enormous towers, it isn't the mighty walls, it isn't even the soldiers. It's the smell. Modern castles that tourists visit today have had centuries to air out. Many are carefully cleaned. Many are empty. Some even have cafes serving cappuccinos. Medieval castles did not. Imagine hundreds of people living together inside thick stone walls, cooking, sleeping, working, fighting, keeping animals, making candles, tanning leather, drying fish, brewing ale, and occasionally forgetting where they emptied yesterday's chamber pot. It was an aromatic experience. Of course, nobody living there thought much about it. When everyone smells roughly the same, there's less motivation to complain. Besides, perfumes existed, they just weren't nearly powerful enough. Flowers were also surprisingly useful, not because medieval people wanted everything to look pretty, but because pleasant smells were precious. A handful of herbs could improve an entire room for several minutes, then reality usually won again. Now, let's walk toward the castle itself. Movies love showing castles perched dramatically on lonely cliffs. And yes, they were, but many castles sat beside villages, rivers, forests, or trade roads. Location mattered. Kings weren't choosing scenery for Instagram. They wanted food, water, taxes, and enemies they could see coming. Building a castle was astonishingly expensive. Imagine constructing an entire skyscraper using only hand tools and horses. Thousands of laborers could spend decades cutting stone. Each block weighed hundreds of pounds. Everything moved by manpower. Every mistake cost months. Every winter slowed construction. Some castles took generations. Imagine your grandfather starting the project, your father continuing it, and you finally getting to sleep inside, only to discover the bedroom leaks? History can be wonderfully consistent. Let's cross the drawbridge. It's heavier than it looks. Movies often show drawbridges constantly moving up and down. In reality, they stayed down most of the time. Lifting them required work, quite a lot of work. Nobody wanted unnecessary exercise, especially medieval engineers. Once inside, the courtyard opens around you. It's surprisingly busy. Blacksmiths hammer iron, children chase chickens, dogs bark at absolutely nothing, servants hurry between kitchens, soldiers sharpen weapons, merchants unload wagons. Someone is shouting, someone else is ignoring them. Business as usual. Castles weren't quiet fortresses, they were miniature towns, sometimes housing several hundred people, sometimes more. Imagine living inside a shopping mall, except everyone owns swords. Now, let's visit the Great Hall. This is the heart of medieval life. Everything happens here. Feasts, meetings, court cases, celebrations, arguments, political alliances, family drama, and endless meals. If medieval castles had living rooms, this was it. The lord sat on an elevated platform, not because chairs were especially comfortable, mostly because hierarchy had to be visible. If you're the ruler, everyone should literally look up to you. Simple, elegant, slightly exhausting. The hall was huge, the ceiling high, the walls decorated with colorful tapestries. Not just because they looked impressive, stone walls become incredibly cold. Tapestries trapped warmth. They're basically giant medieval blankets hanging vertically. Practical decorating. Interior design with survival in mind. Speaking of warmth, let's discuss heating, or rather the lack of. Castles were freezing. Not all year. Summer could actually become unpleasantly hot. But winter? Winter was relentless. Stone absorbs cold remarkably well. Fireplaces helped. A little. Mostly if you stood directly beside them. Move 6 steps away. Congratulations, you're cold again. Bedrooms were particularly miserable. Imagine climbing into bed wearing several layers of clothing, a wool cap, possibly gloves, several blankets, heavy curtains surrounding the bed, not for decoration, to trap body heat. You basically slept inside a fabric box. Romantic? Perhaps. Effective? Only slightly. The king himself often shivered. Royal blood apparently offered no insulation. And while we're talking about bedrooms, let's gently destroy another Hollywood myth. Privacy barely existed. Nobles had servants constantly entering their rooms, helping them dress, undress, carry water, prepare beds, deliver messages, collect laundry, sometimes simply waiting nearby. Being alone was unusual. Even kings rarely enjoyed solitude. Imagine trying to relax while 3 attendants quietly fold clothing nearby. Eventually, you'd probably stop noticing. Humans adapt remarkably well. Now, let's talk about beds. Rich people certainly had nicer beds than peasants, but comfort remained negotiable. Mattresses often contained straw, feathers if you were wealthy, wool if you were fortunate, lumps if you were unlucky, insects if you were everyone. Bedbugs absolutely adored medieval castles. Warm beds, plenty of humans, little understanding of pest control, perfect conditions. Fleas joined the party too, as did lice. Sharing apparently was considered good manners, not intentionally, of course, simply unavoidable. Bathing is another area where modern assumptions get wonderfully confused. Contrary to popular myth, medieval people did enjoy bathing, quite a lot, when possible. The problem wasn't desire, it was logistics. Heating enough water for an entire bath took enormous effort. Buckets, firewood, servants, time. Eventually, people compromised, washing hands, faces, hair occasionally, full bath less frequently. Not because they enjoyed being dirty, because physics was inconvenient. Also, soap existed. It simply wasn't mass-produced. Luxury had limits. The castle kitchens deserve admiration, mostly because they somehow fed hundreds of people every day. Enormous fireplaces dominated the room. Huge iron pots simmered constantly, bread baked daily, ale flowed generously. Water wasn't always trustworthy. Beer often felt safer, which explains quite a lot about medieval decision-making. Imagine dozens of cooks, bakers, scullions, butchers, everyone working around open flames. The temperature could become unbearable, especially compared to the icy corridors elsewhere. Castle life oscillated between freezing and accidentally standing inside a furnace. Food itself varied dramatically. Kings enjoyed roasted meats, game birds, fresh bread, imported spices, expensive wine. Ordinary soldiers, though, rather less glamorous. Stews became common, not because chefs lacked imagination, because stew forgives almost everything. Old vegetables, tough meat, yesterday's leftovers, today's herbs, tomorrow's lunch. One pot solved many problems. Medieval efficiency. Now, let's quietly climb the spiral staircase. Notice something? It's narrow, very narrow. That wasn't poor planning, it was military strategy. Most staircases spiraled clockwise. Why? Because most attackers were right-handed. Defenders moving downward had more room to swing swords. Attackers climbing upward found the wall blocking their movements. Tiny architectural annoyance, potentially life-saving. Castles were full of clever details like this. Engineers may not have invented elevators, but they certainly understood inconvenience. At the top, the wind greets you immediately. Castle towers were beautiful. They were also exposed, cold, wet, and surprisingly lonely. Guards spent long hours watching the horizon. Usually, nothing happened. History contains far more waiting than battles. Hours, days, weeks, watching fields, watching forests, watching roads, watching sheep, occasionally confusing sheep for invading armies. False alarms happened, fortunately. As evening slowly approached, morning arrives quietly inside the castle. Not because everyone sleeps peacefully, quite the opposite. Someone has already been awake for hours. The bakers have lit their ovens. The kitchen servants are hauling buckets of water. Stable hands are feeding horses that seem convinced breakfast is already late. Somewhere in the courtyard, a rooster has decided he is personally responsible for informing the entire kingdom that the sun exists. And because stone walls echo so wonderfully, everyone hears him, even if they didn't want to. Castle life began early, very early. There were no alarm clocks. There were no smartphones buzzing beside the bed. Instead, there were bells, voices, animals, footsteps, and the simple understanding that if you wanted dinner later, work needed to begin now. Even the lord of the castle rarely slept until noon. Contrary to popular imagination, ruling an estate required an endless stream of decisions. Who owed taxes? Which fields needed planting? Which neighboring noble was currently offended? Who had stolen whose sheep this week? History is wonderfully full of sheep-related disagreements. Sometimes they even started wars. People remain impressively consistent. Let's wander toward the castle walls. From the ground, they look impossibly tall. Up close, they're even more impressive. Some medieval curtain walls stretched over 30 feet high. Others were considerably taller. More importantly, they were thick, very thick, several meters in many places. Not because medieval architects enjoyed wasting stone, because thick walls are stubborn. An invading army could smash against them for days, sometimes weeks, occasionally months. Castles weren't built to win battles, they were built to avoid them. If attackers looked at your enormous walls and quietly decided to invade someone else instead, the castle had already done its job. Quite efficient, really. The best victory is often the one where nobody has to climb a ladder, especially if you're the one defending. Speaking of ladders, let's imagine a siege. Hollywood usually portrays medieval sieges as constant fighting, arrows flying, catapults roaring, soldiers charging dramatically every few minutes. Reality was much slower, far slower. Imagine waiting, day after day, week after week, month after month. The attacking army camps outside, the defenders remain inside. Both sides become increasingly bored. Eventually, someone fires a few arrows, mostly to remind everyone the war still exists. Then everyone goes back to waiting. History contains astonishing amounts of waiting. Battles were rare. Patience was mandatory. Life inside a besieged castle slowly changed. Food became precious. Every loaf mattered. Every barrel of grain counted. Fresh vegetables disappeared first, then fruit, then luxury foods. Eventually, meals became repetitive. Stew again. And tomorrow, probably more stew. Fortunately, medieval stew possesses remarkable flexibility. Unfortunately, so does human disappointment. Water remained essential, which is why many castles contained deep wells. A castle without reliable water wasn't much of a fortress. An enemy didn't necessarily need to break your walls. Sometimes they simply waited. Thirst is a remarkably persuasive negotiator. Engineers understood this perfectly. Many castles dug astonishingly deep wells through solid rock, an extraordinary amount of labor, simply so future generations could complain about carrying buckets. Now, let's look upward. Those little openings near the tops of towers, those aren't decorative windows, they're defensive positions. Archers stood there watching the countryside. Contrary to movies, they weren't constantly firing arrows. Arrows were expensive, good arrows even more so. Nobody wanted to waste them shooting dramatically into empty fields. Instead, they watched, and watched, and watched some more. Castle guards may have developed history's greatest appreciation for clouds. Hours passed slowly. The scenery changed very little. Occasionally, a traveler appeared, sometimes a merchant, sometimes wandering monks. Occasionally, someone suspicious enough to justify everyone's attention for nearly 5 whole minutes. Then, back to watching sheep. The sheep seemed never particularly impressed. Let's continue into one of the castle towers. Round towers gradually became more popular than square ones, not because circles were fashionable, although medieval architects probably appreciated variety. Round towers resisted attacks more effectively. Projectiles glanced away more easily. Weak corners disappeared. Engineering quietly defeated geometry, a satisfying victory. Inside the tower, stairs continue spiraling upward. You may notice they're still inconveniently narrow. This was entirely intentional. Invaders wearing heavy armor quickly discovered that climbing steep spiral staircases while someone above threw unpleasant objects towards you was not ideal. Even carrying a shield became awkward. Architects had carefully designed inconvenience into every corner. Passive-aggressive architecture, perhaps history's oldest security system. Now, let's visit one of the least glamorous rooms in the entire castle, the toilet. Technically called the garderobe, which sounds surprisingly elegant. The reality, less so. Picture a small stone seat built into the outer wall. Beneath it, a vertical shaft. Gravity handled the rest. Simple, reliable, not especially fragrant. Sometimes waste dropped directly outside the castle walls, sometimes into pits, sometimes into moats, which certainly added another reason not to swim nearby. If you're imagining medieval castles smelling faintly unpleasant, you're probably still being generous. On the positive side, many garderobes doubled as wardrobes. Clothes were stored nearby because people believed the smell discouraged moths. Oddly enough, they weren't entirely wrong. Sometimes history rewards surprisingly strange ideas. Despite all this, medieval nobles genuinely appreciated comfort whenever possible. Rooms filled with rugs, curtains, wooden furniture, bright tapestries, imported fabrics, anything to soften endless stone. Color mattered. Modern castles often appear gray because centuries have faded them. Originally, many interiors were vibrant. Painted ceilings, rich fabrics, decorated furniture. Life contained more color than we often imagine. It just hasn't survived very well. Stone lasts, fabric usually doesn't. Entertainment also deserves a visit. Without television, people became remarkably creative. Musicians wandered from castle to castle, storytellers recited legends, jugglers performed tricks. Acrobats occasionally risked embarrassing falls. Minstrels sang heroic tales. Some were historically accurate, others less concerned with accuracy. Listeners rarely complained. After all, there was no internet fact-checking. A good story remained a good story, even if the dragon somehow grew larger every time it was retold. Board games became popular too. Chess spread across medieval Europe. Nobles loved it, not only because it was entertaining, because it reflected hierarchy. Kings, queens, knights, bishops, everyone knew their place. Conveniently, even on the game board. Dice games appeared everywhere. Some rulers disliked gambling. Many nobles ignored those opinions. Human nature has always enjoyed risking money over questionable decisions. Some traditions never disappear. Religion quietly shaped almost every hour of castle life. Small chapels stood inside many castles. Morning prayers, evening prayers, religious festivals, saints' days. Faith provided rhythm to everyday existence. Whether peasant or king, most people believed deeply. Religion wasn't merely part of life, it surrounded life. Even military campaigns paused for important holy days. At least when convenient, politics occasionally proved stronger than piety. Humans remain wonderfully complicated. Let's drift into the private apartments. Here lived the lord's family, at least as privately as medieval life allowed. Children filled the rooms, nurses, tutors, servants, visitors, messengers, relatives who somehow always seemed to arrive just before dinner.
The castle is still asleep, or at least as asleep as a medieval castle ever becomes. A few candles continue to flicker in narrow hallways. The fire in the great hall has settled into glowing embers. Somewhere outside, an owl calls into the darkness. A guard pulls his cloak a little tighter against the chilly night air. The stone beneath his boots is cold. The wind is colder, and the hours until sunrise seem wonderfully, endlessly slow. For him, this isn't an adventure, it's another ordinary shift. History has a funny way of turning ordinary jobs into romantic legends. Watching a quiet field for 8 hours doesn't sound particularly exciting, yet centuries later, we imagine noble watchmen standing heroically against impossible odds. The reality was usually much calmer. Most nights, absolutely nothing happened, which, from the guard's perspective, was excellent news. The best night watch was the one where nobody tried to invade. As dawn slowly brightens the horizon, let's wander deeper into the castle, toward one of its most mysterious features, the secret passage. Almost every castle tour mentions one. Almost every movie includes one, and almost every child immediately imagines hidden doors opening behind bookshelves. The truth is slightly less dramatic. Some castles did include concealed passages, but they were rarely elaborate underground labyrinths stretching for miles. Instead, they were practical. A narrow staircase hidden inside a thick wall, a small doorway disguised behind wooden panels, a route connecting important rooms, or, in some cases, an emergency escape leading beyond the outer walls. Nothing magical, nothing especially glamorous, mostly just clever engineering. Still, the idea of disappearing into a hidden stone corridor remains delightfully mysterious. Humans have always loved secret doors. We still do. Now they're just behind bookcases in expensive houses instead of castle walls. The walls themselves deserve another look. They appear solid, unmoving, almost eternal. Yet inside many of them, there's empty space, passageways, storage rooms, tiny staircases, even small chambers where guards could wait unseen. Medieval builders made remarkable use of thick stone. Every inch served a purpose. Some walls were practically buildings all themselves. Imagine living inside something so enormous that the hallway exists inside the wall rather than beside it. Rather impressive, although probably confusing if someone gave vague directions. Turn left inside the wall. Perfectly normal sentence. For medieval people, anyway. Now, let's visit another place surrounded by myths. The dungeon. Hollywood loves dungeons. Dark, wet, chains hanging dramatically from every wall, skeletons thoughtfully arranged in corners, rats apparently paying rent. Reality once again preferred moderation. Many castles didn't even have proper dungeons. Prisoners were often kept in ordinary rooms, or towers, sometimes simply locked inside a secure chamber. True underground prisons certainly existed, but they weren't nearly as common as modern imagination suggests. Building deep underground rooms into solid rock required tremendous effort. Most castle owners preferred easier solutions. Besides, feeding prisoners was expensive. Nobody wanted guests who refused to leave. Punishment during the Middle Ages could certainly be harsh, but imprisonment wasn't always the preferred solution. Fines were common. Public embarrassment was surprisingly popular. Stocks, pillories, standing in the village while everyone laughed at your poor decisions. Not exactly enjoyable, but considerably cheaper than maintaining permanent prisons. Medieval governments appreciated efficiency, sometimes uncomfortable efficiency. Let's leave the dungeon behind. It's not particularly cheerful. Instead, we'll wander into the castle gardens. Yes, gardens. Many castles included beautiful green spaces, not simply because flowers looked pleasant, though they certainly did. Gardens supplied herbs, medicines, vegetables, fruit, fresh scents, quiet places for reflection. Imagine stepping from a cold stone hallway into a peaceful enclosed garden. Birds singing, lavender growing beside narrow paths, bees drifting lazily between flowers. After hours spent inside dim rooms, it must have felt wonderfully refreshing. Perhaps the closest thing medieval nobles had to a relaxing weekend getaway without actually leaving home. Medicinal herbs grew everywhere. Rosemary, sage, mint, thyme, chamomile. Some genuinely helped illnesses, others mostly made unpleasant medicine taste slightly less unpleasant. Doctors understood surprisingly much and surprisingly little at exactly the same time. They could treat wounds reasonably well, set broken bones, recommend rest, prepare herbal remedies. Yet they believed illness sometimes resulted from imbalances in bodily humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile. The human body apparently behaved rather like complicated soup, at least according to medieval medical theory. History occasionally produces wonderfully creative explanations. Castle physicians served wealthy families. Peasants often relied on local healers, monks, wise women, or experienced relatives. Knowledge passed from generation to generation. Some treatments worked, some didn't. Some probably helped simply because someone cared enough to try. Comfort has always been powerful medicine, even when science hasn't yet caught up. Now, let's visit the castle library, if there is one. Not every castle possessed an impressive collection of books. Books were astonishingly expensive, each manuscript copied by hand, sometimes taking months, occasionally years. Imagine purchasing a single book that costs as much as a comfortable house. You would probably treat it rather carefully. Libraries became symbols of wealth, learning, prestige. Owning books quietly announced that your family possessed almost something rarer than gold: knowledge. Even if nobody actually finished reading all of them, some traditions remain timeless. Most noble children learned to read, especially boys expected to inherit land. Girls from wealthy families frequently received excellent educations as well. Contrary to popular myth, medieval women weren't universally denied learning. Many became skilled readers, writers, patrons of scholars, managers of enormous estates. History simply remembered fewer of their names, which is rather unfortunate because many quietly held castles together while everyone else focused on tournaments and politics. When the lord traveled, his wife often managed everything: taxes, food supplies, servants, correspondence, legal disputes, even military preparations if necessary. Imagine suddenly becoming the chief executive officer of an entire estate without modern accounting software, or email, or coffee. Quite impressive, really. History tends to underestimate administrative talent, mostly because paperwork is less dramatic than sword fights, yet paperwork usually keeps kingdoms alive. Speaking of entertainment, let's attend a feast. Not one of the legendary royal banquets lasting for weeks, just an ordinary celebration. Long wooden tables fill the great hall, candles dance softly over polished metal dishes, fresh bread pass from hand to hand, roasted meat fills the air with warm aromas, musicians quietly play near the fireplace, dogs wait patiently beneath the tables, or perhaps not so patiently, occasionally receiving a delicious scrap from generous diners, perhaps receiving far too many. History contains many well-fed castle dogs. Meals became social events. Business happened during dinner. Friendships strengthened. Marriage negotiations quietly unfolded. Political alliances formed between courses. Imagine discussing international diplomacy while someone offers another slice of pie. Quite civilized, assuming nobody argued about inheritance halfway through dessert, which undoubtedly happened. Families remain families, regardless of century. Now, let's gently address another famous myth, the idea that medieval castles were constantly dark. Actually, many rooms contained far more light than people imagine. Large windows appeared where safety allowed, candles illuminated evenings, oil lamps glowed softly, fireplaces cast warm orange light across stone walls. Yes, winter afternoons became gloomy, but castles weren't endless caves. People appreciated sunlight then just as we do now. Whenever architects could safely include windows, they usually did. Nobody voluntarily chose unnecessary darkness. As evening approaches once more, the rhythm of castle life slows. The blacksmith's hammer falls silent, kitchen fires burn lower, stable doors close. Servants quietly tidy the great hall after another busy day. Children yawn.
Excellent. You got the intonation exactly right. Next sentence. Me gustaría pedir un café grande, por favor. The morning mist hangs low across the fields. From the highest tower, the countryside looks peaceful. Tiny farms dot the landscape. Thin ribbons of smoke rise from village chimneys. A flock of sheep wanders lazily across a hillside, apparently unconcerned with politics, noble rivalries, or tax collection. The castle stands quietly above it all, strong, solid, unmoving. At least, that is how it appears. But beneath those thick stone walls, life is already in motion. The castle never truly sleeps. Someone is always awake. Someone is always working. Someone is always carrying another impossibly heavy bucket somewhere. It almost feels like a universal law of history. If you visit any large building from the past, someone, somewhere, is carrying water. Let's step away from the grand halls for a while. Instead, we'll visit the people who made castle life possible, the servants. History often remembers kings, queens, knights, and famous battles. It remembers remarkably few cooks, very few laundresses, almost no stable boys, hardly any housekeepers. Yet castles simply could not function without them. Imagine running a luxury hotel with hundreds of guests using medieval technology. Every meal cooked over open fires, every shirt washed by hand, Every floor swept with handmade brooms, every candle crafted individually, every bucket filled manually. Modern housekeeping suddenly seems wonderfully convenient. A great castle might employ dozens of servants, sometimes well over 100. Each person had a specific role. The cook managed enormous kitchens. The baker produced fresh bread nearly every day. The brewer made ale. The butler supervised food and drink. The chamberlain looked after the lord's private rooms. The steward organized supplies and finances. Even the falconer held an important position. After all, someone needed to care for the hunting birds. You can't simply leave a falcon on the kitchen table and hope for the best. History teaches many lessons. That is certainly one of them. The work was endless. Beds required fresh straw. Fireplaces demanded constant fuel. Ash needed removing. Water had to be carried. Animals required feeding. Meals happened several times a day. Laundry seemed almost impossible. Imagine washing heavy wool clothing without washing machines, without running water, without modern soap. Then imagine doing it for an entire castle. Suddenly, folding your own laundry feels like a remarkable luxury. Even keeping the floors clean proved surprisingly difficult. Many castle floors were covered with rushes. These were long grasses spread across the stone. They added warmth, reduced mud, softened footsteps, and absorbed spills. Convenient for a while. Eventually they needed replacing. Otherwise they became less than pleasant. Some medieval writers complained about old rushes hiding scraps of food, dust, animal droppings, and things people preferred not to identify too closely. Housekeeping has always been a battle against entropy. The Middle Ages simply fought with fewer cleaning products. Now, let's visit the wardrobes. Medieval clothing was far more colorful than many movies suggest. Today we often imagine everyone wearing brown, gray, and perhaps another slightly darker shade of brown. Reality preferred bright colors: deep reds, rich blues, forest greens, golden yellows, purple if you were astonishingly wealthy. Color announced status. Fine dyes cost money. Expensive fabrics announced success before anyone even spoke. Clothing served as social media, without the comment section. Probably for the best. Fashion changed surprisingly often. Sleeves grew wider, shoes became longer, hats became stranger. At one point, pointed shoes became so exaggerated that some required tiny chains attaching the tips to the knees. Apparently, elegance occasionally involved tripping over your own footwear. Every century invents its own version of uncomfortable fashion. We simply use different materials. Armor deserves a closer look too. Contrary to popular myth, knights were not permanently wandering around wearing full suits of steel. Armor was expensive, heavy, warm, and inconvenient for ordinary life. Imagine eating breakfast dressed like a refrigerator. Possible? Certainly. Comfortable? Not especially. Most of the time, knights wore ordinary clothing. Armor appeared when necessary, rather like firefighters wearing protective equipment, not pajamas, despite what some movies seem to imply. Speaking of comfort, let's talk about sleep again. The castle remains noisy, even at night. Dogs bark, horses shuffle inside the stables, someone snores loudly enough to concern nearby wildlife. Wooden doors creak, wind whistles through narrow arrow slits, rain taps gently against stone roofs. Complete silence barely existed. Perhaps medieval people slept more deeply, or perhaps they simply accepted constant background noise. Humans adapt remarkably well. Eventually, even the loudest castle becomes familiar. Outside the walls, life follows the changing seasons. Spring brings planting, summer means long days in the fields, autumn fills barns with grain, winter slows almost everything. The castle depends entirely on this cycle. Without successful harvests, even the richest lord quickly encounters problems. Gold cannot be eaten. Stone walls produce remarkably little wheat. Agriculture remained the true foundation of every castle. Without nearby farmers, the grand fortress becomes little more than an expensive pile of rocks. History occasionally enjoys reminding powerful people where real wealth originates, usually from ordinary workers. Now, let's quietly attend a medieval festival. Not every day involved hard labor. People celebrated often. Religious holidays, harvest festivals, royal weddings.
Victories, saints' feast days, markets. Music echoed through the courtyards. Dancers performed. Jugglers entertained children. Traveling musicians sang heroic songs. Merchants displayed colorful fabrics, exotic spices, beautiful jewelry, perhaps even strange animals brought from distant lands. Imagine seeing a monkey for the first time, or an elephant described by someone who had only heard stories. The Middle Ages still contained wonder, even without electricity. Children loved these festivals. Adults probably did too, though they occasionally pretended otherwise. Games filled the castle grounds: archery contests, wrestling, horse races, simple ball games. Music and dancing continued well into the evening. For a short while, daily worries seemed smaller. Taxes could wait until tomorrow, so could politics. Even kings deserve a holiday now and then. Of course, not everything remained peaceful. Disagreements happened. Neighboring nobles argued over land, inheritance, marriage contracts, trade routes, hunting rights. Sometimes these disputes reached the battlefield. More often, they reached the negotiation table. History remembers famous battles. It forgets thousands of quiet meetings where people simply talked. Fortunately, diplomacy tends to leave fewer ruins behind. As centuries slowly passed, something remarkable happened. Castles began changing. New technology arrived. Gunpowder, cannons, large stone walls that once seemed nearly indestructible suddenly faced a new problem. Explosions. Walls built to resist arrows struggled against cannon fire. Military architecture had to evolve. Star forts appeared. Lower walls, different angles, entirely new ideas. History never stands still. Even stone eventually becomes outdated. Castles also became less comfortable compared to newer palaces. Wealthy families discovered something surprising. Perhaps they no longer wanted freezing bedrooms. Perhaps endless spiral staircases had lost their charm. Perhaps walking through damp corridors every winter wasn't actually luxurious. Gradually, many nobles built elegant country houses instead. Larger windows, brighter rooms, better heating, gardens designed for beauty rather than defense. Comfort quietly defeated fortification. A surprisingly peaceful victory. Some castles remained occupied. Others slowly emptied. Furniture disappeared first, then servants, then families. Roofs collapsed. Rain entered. Plants pushed between ancient stones. Owls replaced noble guests. Foxes wandered through abandoned courtyards. Nature patiently reclaimed what humans had built. Not quickly, not dramatically, just slowly. Year after year, century after century, stone remembers, but it also weathers. Today, millions of visitors walk through these same ruins. Children imagine knights charging across the drawbridge. Adults admire the architecture. Photographers wait patiently for perfect evening light. Tour guides tell stories of kings and queens. Everyone pauses to admire the view from the highest tower. Very few people imagine the laundry, or the endless buckets of water, or the tired cook preparing another enormous pot of stew. History often celebrates extraordinary moments. Real life usually consists of ordinary ones. And perhaps that is what makes castles truly fascinating. They were not simply places where history happened. They were places where life happened, every single day. As the sun begins to set once again, warm golden light washes across the old stone. Long shadows stretch through the empty courtyard. The wind moves gently through broken windows. The castle feels peaceful now, almost sleepy, as though it has finally earned its rest after centuries of noise. If walls could dream, perhaps these ancient stones would remember laughter before battles, children running through the halls, dogs chasing one another across the courtyard, the smell of fresh bread drifting from the kitchens, the quiet conversations beside crackling fireplaces. Not only the kings, not only the queens, but everyone who called this remarkable place home. And with that gentle thought, our walk through another day in the medieval castle slowly comes to an end. The towers remain standing, the stories remain waiting, and tomorrow, we'll continue exploring the lives hidden behind these timeless walls.